Okay, so good morning, everybody. Just very few words to introduce. I'm very happy to introduce LEMONOT today here. They are Sabrina, Morreale, and Lorenzo, Perri. LEMONOT is described by them as a platform for spatial and relational practices, architecture, and performative arts. They both graduated at AMAA in London, where they are actually based, but they work between UK, Italy, Vienna. They investigate relationship between the city in general, the city fabric, the urban fabric, and human rituals through pavilions, exhibitions, design performances, so very different tools. And also the idea of conviviality and social sustainability, but in their cultural and political sense, political meaning. Academic research is also part of LEMONOT. Sabrina is teaching at foundation course at AA. Lorenzo Perri instead is teaching at University of Applied Art in Vienna. They are currently tutors at Royal College of Art, also in London. Their project has been awarded and exhibited throughout the world. Just few cities to remember: Bangkok, Vienna, Mexico City, Milan, Rome. I'm very happy to introduce Sabrina and Lorenzo today, and I give you the word.
Thank you so much, Claudia.
I'm gonna sit down, is that okay?
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here. We gather a few projects that we've been working on in the last 6-7 years. So you're gonna see scattered pieces of things. It's gonna be more of a conversation. If you want to interrupt or tell us to go back, please do. As Claudia mentioned, we are a duo. We never say that we are a practice because we try to merge the knowledge that we have, and we collaborate constantly with other disciplines. So the boundary between architecture, performative arts, and the built environment is always intertwining with each other. Do you wanna?
We're both Italians, but like we have been working and living in multiple parts of the world. We've been living in South America, we've been living in Thailand, we have been teaching in Stockholm, in Vienna, and all these experiences, both professionally and from a human point of view, really enriched, let's say, our architectural journey and what we're trying to show you here and what we have like constantly on the table. As Sabrina and Claudia said, we both graduated at the Architecture Association, which is a very important place for us. Like Sabrina still teaches in there, like I often collaborate. Like we started working in there with students, we started testing multiple approaches, like to really this combination of spatial and relational practices. I graduated there, like, well, I would say long ago, maybe not that long ago. We graduated on a very symbolic day because we graduated on the day of Brexit. It was the 24th June 2016, which is very symbolic for us because it really defines our relationship with, well, you see, Brexit. Well, it really defines our relationship with London, our relationship also with the discipline of architecture, which is interesting, but I would say quite controversial. I graduated with we thought it was interesting to show you how we started this journey. So really, since graduation, since like it's really the moment where we started working together. I graduated with a political brewery. It was a combination between a brewing factory and the Parliament for Informal Politics on top of the market in Burkina Faso. Without going too much into details, we can expand later. It was an accumulation of silos where I would carve different public spaces, like on the rooftop, a sort of crypt, a public space on the ground. Like for me, geometry was like very, very important to define like meticulously all the pieces, all the parts of the building, but like they were all meant as backdrops, like for specific human rituals that would generate them both, like, let's say, aesthetically and in terms of activities. Like it was very important, like to work with a specific element, and like it were the bricks. And like the bricks, as you can see here, I don't know, maybe like if you can perceive it in the screen, but like really like they were defining like the circulation, they were defining like the whole substance of the building. And it was very like interesting to understand how, from such a simple element, you can really play between like vernacular pieces and contemporary ones. And languages, linguistics were very crucial because like the whole point was really trying to use like architecture as a medium to define very specific like contemporary aesthetics that would be embedded like in the iconography of the country, like that it was Burkina Faso, but still performed by a student in London at the time to really hybridize and honestly understand what could come up from such an investigation.
And just to give you a glimpse, I wanted also to show you my thesis project, which was completely different, and it was a pinball machine. It was a machine that questioned the role of the architect. And what I wanted to try to achieve here is like to understand how do we build projects, really? How does creation happens? So because any architectural project does not build on parthenogenesis, we don't start from a tabula rasa. From the day that you are, alive, you start collecting references and conversations and pieces of fragments. And what you do is really to find out, this machine was constructed on 3 different levels that would hit, and you will play the ball in collaboration with other people or against other people as the architect with the client, with the stakeholders. So we have different people interfering with each other. And every time that you will play, a different play field was coming out of this. It was a completely functioning machine. So you had these fragments coming together and bridging each other. I think it's the next slide. And this was the second level where you started to archive references, to understand, to appropriate things. And in the moment that you take it, they becomes yours. And you build and forge connection. So the role of the architect for me was questioning really how to create and merge, how to be a figure that can build in conversation with each other. And these, at the end of the year, were all the outcome, possible playfield that were coming out of the machine after being played for a year with different people and different collaboration.
I mean, as you can see, like 2 very different projects, but like at least in our opinion, with like multiple points in common, like the obsession with objects, the obsession with a specific type of aesthetic, and the obsession like for, let's say, unconventional sources that would really prompt architectural production. After the day of Brexit, like we were really sick of London and we really wanted to move out, and we ended up like in this place, which is La Paz in Bolivia. We were there to set up a visiting school on behalf of the Architectural Association and to investigate, like with the students, the urban fabric and the relationship between specific rituals and the architecture itself. We were really interested in like very specific geometries, in understanding how an arising typology was framing the landscape. And we were interested in the iconography of the everyday, trying to understand, again, the relationship between the everyday and the architecture itself. Just like maybe a few words on Bolivia. Bolivia is perhaps the most multi-ethnic place in the world. It counts more than 38 different ethnic groups. And like at the time, there was an exhibition in London about a specific architect called Freddy Mamani Silvestre that was starting to design in 2013 those buildings, those colorful buildings that you saw in the initial video. And they were like buildings for like the rising bourgeoisie of the AMAA, one of these ethnic groups. They were like for us, like without judging them, but very interesting because like for once, architecture in a place in the world was the discipline that was the best to represent all the social, political, cultural controversies that were happening in the country. Something that, like, let's be honest, we've lost quite a lot. Architecture, like, not often has really that power to portray, like, effectively and at its best society.
But our work with the students was really to understand how to translate this visual language and this merging of cultural folklore and contemporary values into a piece of architecture. So at the end, actually, we worked through the collection of found objects, through the assembling of different costumes or details of embroidery into the construction of the film, of a documentary, well, not really documentary, a fictional film that's been we developed in the last 3 years.
For us, it was really interesting to reflect on these relationships. Like these pictures, at least in our opinion, amazing pictures that Sabrina took are from like one of the main festivities, which is called the Gran Poder, which is an hybrid festivity between indigenous beliefs and Catholic religion. And like, as you can see, like, and this is a constant way of working for us. Like, it's really about like looking for geometries, hidden patterns, like, let's say visual cues that could become morphological, tectonic traits to understand and to inform, again, architectural production. Moving to Thailand, let's say we kept on experiencing, because we taught in Thailand for 2 years at the INDA, which is something similar to here. Like Chulalongkorn University has like an international program, like with international tutors, international like students, and we were teaching in there as adjunct professors for a couple of years. And we kept on investigating performance, photography, documentary as, let's say, a medium for architecture as a trigger.
These are what are called the shops in Talat Noi, which is an historical neighborhood in Bangkok. They are called the Sangong shops. Those are shops that from the Second World War, they export and they commerce, like they export and import only car parts pieces. So you see these moments within the landscape, like the urban landscape, these topographies of fragments, which becomes part of your reality, everyday life. You need to go around these, and they become really almost structural pieces. What happened is that they don't have enough spaces inside the garage, so these pieces are coming out of it. But in this chaotic, what it seems, it might seem this chaotic mess, actually everything is very ordered. If you go there asking for one piece, they know exactly where they are. So
what's interesting is that, I mean, as it happens in a lot of, let's say, well, it used to happen, but it still happens in some like Italian towns, that you will have like in few streets, let's say, the same activity repeated multiple times. So all these pieces are, let's say, somehow framed within like 3-4 perpendicular streets. And like, so these mountains, they end up really characterizing the urban fabric. They end up really like becoming the identity of the place. And for us, what was mind-blowing is that Talat Noi, that neighborhood, is the place that hosts every year the Bangkok Design Week. But no one knows about these places. And the Design Week, the way it happens like similarly like to Milan, to Vienna, to London, to Stockholm. You will have like inside, let's say, other buildings, installations, which are, well, of course, interesting, but they can be seen like in a lot of places in the world. What we thought, it was like, we needed really to celebrate the reality, the authentic, like, if you want, such a reality that characterized the neighborhood hosting the Design Week. So what we ended up doing is like cataloging, let's say, a set of human and mechanical portraits. And like you can see the QR code and the location. We were giving like to the visitors of the Design Week a sort of alternative guide to map. And if you want to celebrate, to witness like the truth, like the authenticity of the neighborhood.
And also at the same time, what happened is that while we took this picture and we started collaborating or even understanding, you know, each other, because due to language, it was quite complicated. We were always there on site, present. We started to create an historical stratigraphy of what's going on, because each piece embedded a certain value, a certain time, a certain location. So we ask the shop owners to collaborate with us for this installation. And we wanted to create, well, an auction, a stage set.
And an auction. You asked us like to somehow to select 2 keywords for this presentation, and like we provided time and negotiation. We believe that we're quite crucial here, because as you can see, again, like this was an attempt to look for unexpected, let's say, hidden iconographical opportunities. And in here, like if you think about it, like a very utilitarian commercial need generates a very specific architectural iconography, because these pieces, they need to be stored, they need to be sold. And so that's why they become mountains, somehow transforming the public space. So for us, it was important to construct something that simultaneously celebrated, dignified, not only represented these commercial practices.
And I think that maybe, sorry, one thing that is important to mention is the fact of time frame when you build something, but when you create a space, right? So this space was empty. What we proposed was an empty pavement. And then slowly, shop owners start to came and lay down their pieces. So the topography started to happen throughout the whole festival, and you could see the change of the room that started to become, you know, the main event of the design biennale. It became a statuary room where we started to sell the pieces as art piece, a sort of Duchamp way of interpreting this. And what was absolutely stunning for us was the exchange between, you know, the shop owners and all these artistic of architects that we always speak with each other. We never exchange outside of the architectural fields. So at the end of the auction, between them, they started to sell their pieces. They were happy to like give more and more
We needed time to negotiate with them and to gain their trust. The booklet, that alternative guide, really helped us to really be in touch with them and really like seeing that by the end of the auction, they would invite like friends and customers to sell pieces. So we really constructed these, like the whole point was trying to hybridize the local audience and the audience of the design week that otherwise coexist in the same space, but they are always kept isolated. So the fact that really, like, again, these pieces could be sold as artistic ones for a very specific audience, but they became also like props to be sold to usual customers. So it was, again, like something that dignified simultaneously like the commercial and the artistic, let's say, side of such a phenomenon.
I think it can be described as sort of we built architecture, or we try to apply architectural rules as a palimpsest, as a framework for other things to happen. So we constantly work between various scales. At the scale of the objects, we are truly compulsive collectors. I think some of like our friends here knows that. We have always like tiny things that we bring back from projects.
Let's not spoil the next slide.
Okay, sorry.
No, because no, this one maybe. Like the thing is, like this is a commission that we got. Well, the commission. Like, last year, they asked us to design a playground on paper, and so it was like for a publication in Milan. So what we did, like we put together some of the projects that we have. We tried to arrange them as if they were like on top of a table or within an architectural space. Like in Italian, the title sounds a bit better. It's Favole imbandite. That means like laden fairy tales. But like, and the idea is that these could be an accumulation of our project, but it could be also our place. Like really, that's from our place, and like it looks like the table. Like we live and work from the same space because in London we cannot really afford a studio until now. So like when we start like designing a project, we often like accumulate multiple things like in front of ourselves, multiple objects that we gather like in all these travels and like human and professional experiences that we were talking about.
And I think it's very rare for us to start any architectural project with an architectural reference. We always start from something else. That it can be, you know, a dissected breast or a series of porcelain statues.
And this idea of working in between, like without going too much into the project, but like the idea of working in between, again, objects and architecture, without starting from something architectural, but treating anything deeply architecturally. So what does it mean to really work between figurative inputs and geometrical abstraction? Like this is a project like that we did with students in Bangkok, where it was about investigating Chinatown's sculptural typologies. It was about understanding the origins of stereotypes and cliches. And long story short, we had to build a pavilion that somehow was inspired by a dragon. What does it mean to construct a geometrical dragon? What does it mean to treat geometrically feet? Like, what does it mean to treat geometrically like a lot of parts that are composing like iconography that people know?
Also, how to translate through craft, you know, a sense of a narrative. So in this case, we started to also work with other, you know, this was a stage set for a Chinese opera singer that we built in Bangkok in a matter of days. But what is important for us was the fact that everything that you see, I don't know if you, everything that you see on site are found objects and or memorabilia from the owners. So we actually, all we did was to construct and to assemble these pieces together and allow the singer to go through. So it was a sort of corridor, allowing the people to just like watch this opera from below, hearing the sound, and then going through and discovering the memory of the objects.
And the whole point even in here, no? The time. Like they asked us to design this stage set in like 3-4 days, and they asked us somehow to convince the owner of the house to show, okay, well, to convince, like to help him to feel at ease, to feel comfortable, to show a series of like memorabilia. The project is called Intimate Memorabilia, like that he had in this space. Like, for example, you see like the table that you see in the middle with those wooden frames that belong to a roof. They were like scattered like in a garage, like completely destroyed. So we were convincing him like they're valuable. Like, and then we were helping him like to negotiate with this, let's say, Chinese singer, so to make them bond through the construction of the stage. So it's the whole space is a space of negotiation that could happen only through a limited amount of time. And so that's why architecture, like, and its recognizability, like, plays a key role. Like, I mean, going deeper into this idea of figurative inputs and geometrical abstraction, and like trying to show you a bit like how we really work geometrically and how we really, let's say, cook our obsession with certain parts of the body that like are quite visible in the illustration. This is a commission that we got a few years ago, like a very small one, like, but we got a few years ago for the Milan Design Week, that we were asked to build a suitcase which would be full of our references. And so, I mean, again, it started with a table at our place with some objects. What do we use? How do we really? We were like, as usual, doing some competitions, working on some pieces of architecture. I mean, like some things that we just bought outside of the market. So what do? We decided to make this sphere that could open up. Let's say,
Duchamp comes back with the boîte and valise, everything that can fit together within just one, shell.
And then, like, we were, I mean, you see like this sort of golden balloon, you see a sort of, well, it explodes now, a sort of teapot on the bottom, like, but for us, it was really, yeah, you see the teapot there on top. For us, it was important, again, to construct something like deeply figurative and deeply, let's say, embedded in those objects that were talking to us at the moment. Here we love like we would love like that these look like Jean Arc compositions, but like this idea of having like those pieces that are, I mean, very intuitive, but how do we do them as architects? Like for us, like we don't have those skills like to make them perhaps like intuitively, like through plastilene. Like we really need to use our tools, which again are very architectural. Like so, these pieces are like meticulously, like it takes us a lot to really craft and to really use almost like the rules of descriptive geometry that they teach you like in first, second years of architecture. And so understanding what does it mean to take seriously a teapot? What does it mean to internalize it, to somehow alter its connotation and to make it yours, and like to be able to manipulate it? Because like once you have it processed, well, the project that went far, we had to build like some holders that would keep it in shape as if it was a lamp, that would allow people to bring it, to carry it as if it was a suitcase. So from something very, very simple, as soon as you start really processing it, like with the tools that you're given as an architect, that like you really use it. And again, other, let's say, even like how then do you construct, let's say, a balloon that could go on top of a teapot that could be, let's say, placed vertically and horizontally and would fit within a sphere? How do you really, let's say, manipulate all these constraints? And for example, like that's why I'm saying a lot, this word balloon is like, I feel it's one of the most interesting stories that we were having at the time contingently. That balloon is because at the time, and it was right before the pandemic, we were supposed to build an inflatable in Milton Keynes. And like we were really, that thing, for example, it wasn't a reference for us. It wasn't an object. It was a project that we were doing at the time. And the fact of having, let's say, to fit it in that suitcase helped us to, let's say, to construct some of its architectural pieces. Like, for example, if you see here, like this is like the thorough construction of the whole piece. At some point, look at that one. That intersection with the semisphere is to make it fit within the suitcase. But like that helped us also to construct, for example, a rigid part within the inflatable that then could be dissected through a set of skylights. Because like, again, understanding how do you construct an object by, let's say, using what you know, like you want to make an inflatable, you need rigid areas, you need like fluffy areas. So how do you do them?
And I think that we also included the going back and forth between this project and these other residency that we were doing in Palermo, in Sicily. We started to work on the iconography of pastry dessert, Sicilian desserts. And these are what are called the minne di Sant'Agata. The minne are the breast, they're coming from the myth of the breast of Sant'Agata, who often is depicted with the cutted breast on top of a plate or serving it to the, in churches you find many of these paintings. The story is a story of pain.
The Roman emperor that wanted her, she refused it, and so like he ordered like to cut her breast, but then the saint helped her, and so that's why like for us, like what's interesting and why we're showing you this is like again the idea of time and negotiation. Like we want to show you how we cook again some ideas. Like this is an artist residency that we did in 2019, and it had nothing to do with architecture. Really, they helped us. They asked us to really build cake molds that would somehow make explicit this idea of, let's say, pain behind the joyful aesthetics, the playful aesthetics of Sicilian dessert. But then as soon as we started, like then we started playing with some elements. We started, again, negotiating also among ourselves, like with certain things and like trying to understand how, let's say almost spontaneously, naturally, how while we were building those molds, how they could be, let's say, scaled up, how they could be used differently.
And also it came from just the gestures of wanting to reattach this breast to the saint. And we wanted just to give back this notion where there are multiple, pieces maybe that are needed in order to have, because we didn't explain it properly, but the linea have a cream inside of ricotta, of cheese, that comes when you open it, the hard shell, you taste it, and the ricotta comes out of it. So the softness of the ricotta needed to be used in this case as a framework for this model.
The idea was like obliging the user how to screw to actually reattach something in order to have like this feeling of like of whipped cream. So to use the sucker post endings to really somehow make this performance. It didn't happen because again, it was right before the pandemic. So like we prepared all the tools, all the palimpsests, and then we couldn't do the performance, but it was useful anyway. It's like while we were doing it, again, no one asked us to produce anything architectural. But like what happens a lot in our, let's say, well, it's not a practice, like in our duo, is that like we often have ideas that we try to transform into architectural pieces that are waiting for the right opportunity. We often like do things that are, well, they're waiting for the right commission, the right competition. Like we don't want to lose the momentum. So when we were working with these pieces, like we were making these models, and then like the very last day, and that's why this is a bad picture, because we were packing, we were coming back to Rome from Palermo, we were looking at these molds, and like by doing that, we said, well, but these pieces could be amazing skylights. Like it would be, you see, from the balloon where we were having simple cones. These are ready-made elements, the sucker post ending with a very specific aesthetic. You look them from below, like with the infrastructure that we built to make them all, like they were really interesting. And so, well, we started like designing something, and we started like really playing with their scale to understand how they could generate a space. 3 years later,
we came to Rome, and we were asked for an installation for the London Festival,
the Roman Festival,
Rome Festival Architecture, which would allow to build this Oasi dei Golosi, which in English is
an oasis for people which are, let's say, eager to consume public space, or which are like very gluttonous.
Gluttonies, yeah. And we built this pavilion where the sakaposh are increasing in their sizes. You will be allowed to go from below. You will see the skylights and the pieces from above.
What's interesting about this is that, like, as you can see, we kept it almost like super literal. But like that's really the challenge, because like we wanted to keep the recognizability. We wanted everyone to feel immediately that they were sakaposh endings, but like we didn't want to compromise on the scale. Like these are almost 8 meters high, it's more than 10 meters wide in its diameter. So it becomes like quite hard, quite challenging to really keep that kind of the thinness, to keep like a lot of, let's say, leaders, because again, the budget was very low. We had like time. We had like 2 days to assemble it. So we really needed to optimize all the joints. We needed like to optimize a lot of things in order, again, to keep this familiarity, this like recognizability, like the people going below it, they would like immediately benefit of these skylights, and they would immediately recognize them. And for us, it was amazing the first time that we went on site. I don't know if we told it to Claudia. We didn't know, we actually talked with the security guards, and then they told us, well, do you know who did this? And we were, no, we have no idea. And they were like, we heard that some architect pastry chef did that. We were like, we got it. Like people like got it what we were doing. Like it was perfect. And then, but again, you need to treat it seriously as a piece of architecture. For example, and Claudia knows the story, but like we fought a lot for these V's on the perimeter, because like we thought they were needed. Because like the thing was supposed to be cantilevered, because again, we didn't want anything to interfere with it. But then we couldn't be on construction side, like the cables, the tension cables that would hold it towards the center, like the constructors, they didn't consider it enough. So again, we needed to compromise.
And I think also it's important that the space, is used and appropriated as people want it, as citizens are, are free to choose. So we did some barbecues. We did some barbecues where the smoke was coming out of the cones. We did in the night. It was used also as a disco / music amplifier. We sat down with many of our students to eat on a Sunday when the parking lot was actually empty because people were going to the seaside.
Just one thing that is like, I feel that's to be mentioned again, this idea of playfulness, but also like being serious about the architectural potentiality. Like this, when you see them, like it's still, so Rome, June, super hot, you would think you would boil below them. You do not, because like they act as chimneys. It's open on the bottom, it's open on the top. They are inclined, so they don't get heated as if they were like, let's say, steel pieces of a car, but also, and they have like the chimney effect. So it's a very pleasant space. So otherwise, like people wouldn't. Yes, wouldn't stay below it. And for us, it was important because, like, again, naturally, it was supposed to be a temporary intervention. But then, like, citizens, they started talking with the municipality, asking the municipality to redesign the parking lot around it. And for us, like, doing these participatory projects, combining spatial and relational practices, dealing with time negotiation, there's a very important text by a Belgian architect, Jan Geller, which is titled From Parking Lot to Public Space. And there was, like, one of these true stories, like, that from a parking lot could have been a public space. Well, then we couldn't, because like we had to move it. So now you can go, it's almost finished, like you can go in front of Tiburtina station.
And actually the act of negotiation happened not by us, but by Arianna, Eleonora, Giacomo, and Daniele, which are the students that took care of this. And they convinced the municipality to move this infrastructure. So at the moment, we're still like working out the paint and.
We just wanted to say one thing. We were right. There are no pillars in the perimeter, as you can see. The thing like behaved differently, and like it's really more inviting. Now we hope like that it be painted and finished soon, so that people can really use it. Because again, like for example, we don't want to give the feeling that it's an art piece. Because like right now, a lot of people actually seeing it surrounded by a fence. They really treat it as an art piece. Well, it shouldn't be such. Actually, it's an object to be used, to be appropriated, to actually, to interact with. Because like otherwise, and of course, we understand that it has an aesthetic that might belong perhaps to a more artsy, let's say, realm than an architectural one, which is what we wanted to convey. But like in terms of action, it really needs to be used as an actual space. And this idea of,
yes. I mean, this is one of the major references that we use also in our studio at the Royal College of Art, is a manifest, like convivial manifesto, a declaration of interdependence. And what for us, just a tiny glimpse about what is it. It's it was published in France and signed by 333 philosophers, anthropologists, sociologists that wanted to change, and actually this is the important bit, from conviviality, which is a word, they added the ism. So it becomes a movement. It becomes
it's basically that, I mean, if you think about it, if conviviality, that for us as Italians is a very common word, but like it's a precise type of publicness, which is, let's say, related to the practice of living together. The ism somehow advocates for the systematization of its social, political, theoretical principles.
Also as an action.
As an action, so it becomes like a political tool. And for us, it's important, like, I mean, all these, and that's why we are saying not artwork, like there are architectural pieces that they need to have, we're really keen on aesthetics, on languages, on iconography, on construction, but they really work actively. They're not contemplative devices. And what we're trying to say, even conviviality, that of course, like it's the joy of being at the table, of being comfortable, or like having amazing chats, but it's a tool. Like in the next slide, like we want.
I'm going.
Like that's, for example, one of our favorite references ever from our beloved London, 1996. Shepherd Bush, M41. People were protesting like to reclaim the streets, to transform like a highway into a park. And in here you would have like that stilt walker, like she below, let's say, her body or a dome, if you like, she was protecting people, drilling holes to plant trees few centimeters far away from the police. So like her body became an architecture that was framing a very controversial convivial situation, because again, we are not talking about like being together at the table. We're talking about being together in a very tricky situation, and like being able to do that because of a very specific and conventional architecture.
So then the question is really how to approach the public space as an architect working in close relationship with citizens to change, to provoke, and to work through, why not, fictional, in this case, fictional documentaries and scenarios that would allow for the stakeholders or for the rules to change the urban planning of a neighborhood. This is a documentary that I worked on in Stockholm in the last years, asking people to get involved through interviews, getting to know what keeps this neighborhood together. Isn't it just a matter of urban planning applications? How can we be more involved, more present? How can we have our voice showcase from a visual point of view, not from a written point of view in response to something? So actually, just going back really fast, what I started to work was just through the green screen to take interviews, to record the voices of the people living in the building that they were being kicked out. And I projected on every building slowly throughout the 1 year possible scenarios of, like, for example, Kalle really wanted, the guy that you see on the left, really wanted a boat club instead, of a new building of apartment. So through fiction, you can also achieve or help people inventiveness to trigger, in a different way.
That's really the question: what keeps a neighborhood together? And like, could it be working with documentaries and films in the public space, or could it be working on the public space itself? And how time and negotiation again play a key role. This is an intervention that we did in Vienna in 2017, where the municipality asked us to imagine future scenarios for this very gray square. Budget, well, almost zero. Maybe if you go back 1 second. Budget almost zero, few days. So what we had to do is trying to reconfigure the space with colorful tape. This is duct tape, so super cheap. So what we were trying to understand, okay, what's nearby? And nearby there was a kindergarten. So we wanted really to engage with kids, because if we were able to engage with kids, they would convince their parents to stay, we could talk to them, and then they would convince the municipality. So what we wanted is actually to give the sense of completion, at the end of every day. So we basically imagined the whole pattern in steps with different animals. You would have first day a crocodile, second day turtles, third day a fish, and then ultimately you would have the whole thing. But then at the end of each day, when kids were coming out from the kindergarten, they would see the animal and they would talk to us. And again, trying to engineer and construct in few days a crocodile in public space, it's a serious matter. We had to produce lot of plates with very precise points in order to be effective and in order to make sure that we were completing that crocodile in time for kids to get out.
Also, there is a set of doing drawings, not to represent, not to portray things, but as a kit of instruction to allow others to take, to empower the people in order to then do them themselves. And what happened actually was that the playfield and the pavement never got finished because it rained. So all the tape for 1 day was gone.
But it was interesting for us because we said, okay, it rained. So we didn't build the fish. We built the crocodile, we built the turtles. It rained, it destroyed it. And so we said, okay, we start from scratch. But then this lady actually came downstairs from the apartments, and she showed us that she took a lot of pictures of the whole installation. She made a booklet, and she was thinking to go to the municipality with the booklet. So the piece was finished. For us, its task wasn't to be fully constructed, because it would have stayed 10 days more, but its task was to trigger that. So again, how construction drawings can become tools as a book, as a documentary about the public space, to talk to people, to negotiate with them, to gain their trust, and to help them to help you.
This is another project of co-designing that we wanted a field competition.
Now we'll show you a series
of field competition we're going to show you, where we tried to, what we proposed was to work for the courtyard of the Museum Pecci in Prato, in Tuscany.
In line of the one before, slightly more complicated, because this idea of constructing pieces that could form a puzzle that kids could understand. It was a design for a playground. We wanted to make it, Prato is my hometown, and again, low budget. We're very famous for textile leftovers. So we wanted to imagine a landscape where we didn't have the money, to build an actual one, a rubbery one of usual playground. So we thought about working with the red leftovers of fabric to actually build such a thing, with like animalistic pieces navigating within like, let's say, the meanders of the landscape. Like, what was interesting for us, of course, it was that triggering some, let's say, compositional relationship between, like, this is a contemporary art museum, it's called the Museo Pecci in Tuscany, which has a very peculiar interstitial space. So we were thinking about, again, doing something on the floor, working with the landscape, with these pieces. But for us, apart from these images that we think are very, very good, even though, again, it's a failed competition, it was important to understand what does it mean to involve kids into a co-design process. Because let's be honest, co-design is often a very shallow word. We say we are going to co-design and we do not. So how do we really, again, empower kids, and how do we really help them to help you?
And also, like, as an architect, many times you're asked, you know, through residency, through project, to come in, to intrude in an environment that is not yours, in a context that you need to study first. And then when you leave, there is a gap, you know, there is a void. And then what we wanted to have is this constant rearrangement. We are just giving you the tools, and then you are in charge of changing it, the location, the fabric structure, the composition between the pieces.
Because what's the scale of it? Like this one, of course, like it's the scale of the whole program, but it would have been, if you want the competition, a board game. So a board game in scale 1 to 50, 1 to 20, so that really, because like those lines actually on the ground, they're very, very modular. They are based on the repetition of the 4 linear walls that you see. So actually, if you give to kids the linear walls and then they start playing and then you take pictures, then you can completely redesign like the thing based on actually their ideas. So in that sense, like how, again, co-designing actively, we're really in favor of hands-on practices, understanding how certain things, they need to be crafted conceptually, but then they need to have, let's say, a practical outcome. And even in here, no? Again, talking about disassembling, engagement, participation in public space, especially when it comes to temporary, ephemeral intervention. In here, it was about constructing a pavilion in a public space in front of a student home, student housing project. So, well,
with brooms.
We said brooms. At the end, like of the intervention, actually, this pavilion can be disassembled. It stays there as a bunch of itinerant benches, and then the students or the residents can take a broom. So the broom becomes the symbol of, let's say, continuity between the public, the domestic sphere, an element, a tangible one, to really take care of
and also,
space.
like the part, we started this project really thinking about the afterlife. So we started from the opposite, not from the initial like question of like build a pavilion, but we said, how can we leave no traces of what is left of these pieces that usually they're thrown away or they're changed, they're temporary installations. So we started from the brooms, everyone could take one back home. So at the end you had just a series of elements that would just, you know, be independent from each other. And,
well, talking about, let's say, again, engagement in public space, and somehow being here also to assess certain failures which are related to negotiation and time. This was we were shortlisted for another competition for the London Festival of Architecture, and it was about like co-designing, again, interesting word, equity in public space. We approached it through the realm of food. And what we thought was like constructing a system between existing digital platforms in London. One, which is related to community fridges. I guess that all of you know what a community fridge is. It's like a fridge that can be used by a framed community where people could put food and then like it could be used by the others. Even though in London, these places are not very public because they are often within like youth center or they're often within, let's say, co-working spaces. So we thought, what about putting it in public space? But how do you do it? On the other hand, you have another platform, which is called Olio, where basically you have like free geos, people that every night collect leftovers from supermarkets, and then they distribute it to others from their houses. But in order to subscribe, your fridge needs to meet certain requirements. So what we said, well, let's create a system. Let's construct a public, itinerant public fridge that meets those requirements and can be actually overlooked by people, and then can be somehow prompting, let's say, dinners in public space.
I think that in this case, the cart, most of the projects, sorry, just to go back, most of our design happened just in that schedule that you see there. It was the calendar of events and the putting people in connection with each other and creating the system of this constellation of people getting involved between foundation and people that are not even in contact usually. So the cart is a medium to activate these moments.
And again, as you saw, for example, here, the role of inflatables, so like certain visual symbolic elements that are quite important when you want to construct engagement in public space. And in here, maybe the next slide, for example, for us, it was very important to also trigger a very intuitive sense of belonging. So that's why you can see that the color palette or the piece looks on one hand very alien, but on the other hand, like very, let's say, belonging to the place, which is Midfield Market, an amazing market in central
One
London.
of the oldest meat markets.
Failed, and we truly believe that like the competition commission has a point in that. Like they somehow celebrated the aesthetics, they celebrated the intentions, but like the festival would last only for 3 months. And like somehow what they told us that those 3 months for such a layered project where you need to convince like a digital platform, when you need to convince the public, when you need to convince people that it's a playful place, so like even people in need of free food could come there without being subjected to social stigma, it needed more time. And so that's why we really accepted it, and we are now trying to develop it like more slowly with like companies in London to have like the right amount of time to make such a piece effective.
Yeah, effective. After that, we started to actually design a lot of tables, and then this is just you know, small. They are for us are prototypes for other projects. So they are always coming in. So this was built in Hungary for a festival, and we started to look actually at the dynamics of how to share and negotiate space in a at the table.
This is again like our controversial relationship with London. This is a very British reference. As you saw, like we actually never built anything in London, which were very sad. But we often refer to things coming from the British environment. This is an amazing illustrator. Well, I would say an architect at the end of the day, which is called William Heath Robinson. In 1926, started to do a series of illustrations about ideal home. An ideal home. Hilarious, but like of course like very, let's say, interesting when it came to details. This is called space economy at the wedding, where like people that have a lot of space like to celebrate the wedding, and well, they're doing the ceremony and then the table would go on top of them. Like,
and what we looked at is like, you know, actors playing together, different weights coming in. So this was a week-long workshop, but each student was asking the other one to cut his own piece to become either a mask for a performance and slide back into this pizza table.
So the idea is like, yeah, it was built wrongly, because again, like if you design it in advance, you will have like all the different shapes, and then you can optimize the position of the beams and like the panelization of the plywood according to the shapes. But on purpose, because again, it was with students, we built this gigantic pizza, that circle that was like 5 meters diameter, and then we started slicing it together and positioning the beams according, because like again, if I want to have a very baroque piece, but like I have a border with Sabrina, I need to negotiate it with her. My border is her border is mine. We really need to understand together how they fit into the puzzle. Like, and again, so not only like the way of constructing it, but also like the way of being in it. Like it was an inhabitable. Because like the idea is just by, this is an amazing book, you should have a look at it if you don't know it, like Rudowski, Now I Lay Me Down to It, without taking for granted anything when it comes to body gestures, to activities, to movements. Why do I need to eat seated at the table? Can I inhabit it? Can I lay down? And like very, very simply, what we were doing is like it was built 1.10 meters high, so people could sit below it, and then they could pop up from these holes. And some of them were for hands, some of them were for the head, some of them were for the bodies, and like they could prompt what you see in here.
And I think that what is important also is to understand and to learn from these prototypes or these like really fast, enjoyable moments for the next project. So then we start to learn and understand what type of gestures or movements are you able to do within your body, within your, you know, your heights. And we started to develop a new one,
which is very similar to the Tudor, no?
Cutted in different, well, in a different manners, because this is going to be used by a butcher, sorry, to teach children about meat consumption, to learn about where the pieces of the meat come from. So there is a whole new, you know, idea of how this is going to be used in Tuscany. Is going to be there in that one.
that can be built effectively, that has like a lot of the hinge pieces, so it's optimized. But again, it started as like an act of negotiation, happened in 5 days with students, and 2 years later, now we're rebuilding it properly. And like, well, since the start, it had like a very peculiar relationship with the landscape that for us is always like very crucial. This leads us like to another project which is called Marble Salad, where again, like these two words, time and negotiation. How are we doing with time? Yeah. And like time and negotiation that are for us very crucial. This is an artist residency. Budget was 0 budget. And then they asked us to construct a piece to anticipate a vegetable garden, an orto. And so that's why we wanted to construct this called Marble Salad, where the artifice, the polychromy of the marbles could anticipate the zucchini, tomatoes, aubergines. How long does it take to do such a thing? To build it, a day and a half. At the end of the day, you just carve 5 centimeters in the ground. You put 4 metallic profiles to strengthen the shape. And then you use like dry construction methods. So you have a bit of gravel, you have stones.
Yeah, sand.
But how long did it take in reality?
It took a month for us, because what we were keen, we didn't know that we want to use marble pieces. We just went around, you know, the small town, and we started to look a lot about these cemeteries. They were leaving marble scrap pieces around. So our work for a month was just to go around and collect pieces that for them would have taken money and, you know, like time to recycle. And we started to bring them back with our little scooter, with our car, with the stuff. And then we started to collect, to archive, to understand, to select the pieces.
And it's not a random process, because at first you actually get what they give you. So because again, you're helping them to dismantle it. Then at some point, you start having some of them, you look at them, you assess them. And so as you can see here, there are like some really little rules. Most of the pieces, they basically have like a refined edge and a very rusty one. So like, and then at some point we were having like a lot of pink or a lot of blue or a lot of yellow. So you start becoming picky. So like maybe to select the first, I don't know, 50 pieces, it takes you 3 days. Then to select the next 50 pieces, it takes you 2 weeks, because you wanna be very selective. So, and that's why in our opinion, it's very interesting to understand how long does it take to make things when you really try to combine relational and spatial practices, when you really try to use like these pieces as tools to enable relationships with the people. And that's why the title at the beginning, designing narratives, shaping relationships, which for us are basically the same. We don't know how to construct the difference.
The last project that we're going to show you is Gastronomic Palapa. It was a pavilion built in Mexico City just in 2020, pandemic times. It was used as what we wanted to propose for the competition was a public pantry. I don't know if I can just go to
maybe no, maybe sure. Like no, what is nice about this is that like it puts together, in our opinion, a lot of things that we have been discussing during the presentation. Like, and again, a lot of things that we believe are successful, and a lot of failures, mistakes, or like things where we got unlucky. So that's the piece. But the way so as Sabrina said, it's a dryer for chili. But the way it started, again, as we're telling you, like we often do things before competitions or competitions waiting for years. The way it started with that, which is a book called The Architecture of Code. Like we always were obsessed with the idea of doing a code dryer. Because like we just think that there are like some typologies related to logistics, to production, that are never inhabited by humans as public spaces, and that they have like very interesting potentialities in that regard.
One of the first this story where they say that you could smell the cod around the streets in Porto, you know, and then people started to ask, but why in these 2 roads you can like really smell the cod everywhere from the streets, from the shops, and near the restaurant? And then they started to understand. I mean, I don't know if it's a myth or a narrative, but people were washing the cod inside the toilet on the top of the. When you went to the bathroom and you push, you know, the water was desalinating the cod automatically. So it was something that fresh water came in, you used the toilet, you were washing throwing the water, and then the corn would just be like ready to be cooked after. And this was very interesting for us because we really wanted something that could bring us back to this really strong identity or visual narrative of, you know, these frames, structural elements that hold an ingredient, an edible
edible element, understanding like how these edible elements, they can really become architectural materials. Because like really, like it's an amazing one. Like if you go below like a coat dryer and you really see this ceiling, like it's actually, I don't know if some of you went to the Venice Biennale like a few years ago, where when Aravena in the first room of the Arsenale, who constructed ceiling with metallic leftovers. Like somehow these ideas having like very crafted, sophisticated, but like think about something like this where the smell is also like a key effect. Or think about the one on the right. That's a church in Trentino Alto Adige where people actually dry corn on terraces, and then someone thought that it was interesting to play with the different stages of the drying to build a church. And
but you know, the church is a public space and it's a shared space. So for us, it was also understanding programmatic values of these and changes, but as well the element of corn that becomes a facade. So we came back to Italy and to our own, you know, what we are used to see, we have it within ourselves. And then we started to look at chilies.
Because when the competition was there, we said, okay, maybe in Mexico, if we work with chilies, could be really the right opportunity to construct a dryer, to really propose a pavilion, which is not a contemplative one, but an actual one, and people will inhabit it. We started investigating, and we learned that we didn't invent anyone. That people actually, while drying chilies, they would build very interesting pieces of architecture, even differently. Look at the shadow, like even chili threads and the pitch roof, like it produces something very special, something like spatial and spatial, like very, very architectural.
So then we wanted to play with shadows. We wanted to construct an architecture of lines, a structure, a palimpsest for these chilies. And our first initial ideas, and we're going to be truthful with you, was to have these chilies and learn about which type of typologies could be dry for the whole time of the festival. So in 3 months, how can we start from green chilies that then start to dry out and becomes red? What is the best one? Which is the heaviest? Which is the lightest?
Which is the nicest?
Which is the nicest?
Because you've got to be serious. Like you want to build with marble, you're going to go to a place and you're going to understand all the nuances. Like you want to have like pink, green, whitish. If you want to build with chilies, you've got to know the chilies. You've got to understand which are the properties and how really, as the church with the corn, you can have like an alive ceiling that like through its drying actually affects its architecture. We were actually, let's be honest, we were unlucky and we did a mistake. We were unlucky because like the project was supposed to be built in February 2020, so during the dry season in Mexico, so it could act as a dryer, and because of COVID, it was postponed to September 2021 during the humid season, so like they couldn't dry. And we made a mistake also, because the thing is like, well, we were happy. What we're trying to say is that architecture is important. And so like this structure that we constructed, so the thinness of the portals, the elements that we're gonna see now was very key for us. Fresh chilies, like they were too heavy. So it was a structural mistake. So if we wanted to keep the thinness of the beams, those chili, like we needed to reassess the architecture itself. So we needed to make compromises on the portals if we wanted to keep them fresh.
And we needed more volume.
So we couldn't first.
And therefore, we opted for using zacates, which is this sponge, and was also very, very good because at the same time, these chilies were encapsulating the seeds of chili, so it wasn't too spicy when you were coming in. It was almost holding in the strong spiciness. And we started to, you know, construct this sort of pavilion, but also cathedral of color. Once inside, it was completely different. It was like vibrant red. And we wanted to have people coming in from 2 directions. One is from the main door on the right, and one was like a very thin passage on the top. And we wanted to have people in conversation with each other through these three red tongues, these burning metal tongues that we were hoping to cook, but then pandemic.
We'll see them in a bit. But no, what's interesting about that is that, again, so we use like already dried chilies. So we needed volumes, and so that's why we used like those organic sponges. But we ended up then, if you put it back 1 second, spending a lot of money in chilies. So again, we didn't want to compromise on the proportion of the architecture. We didn't want to compromise on the elements, but we needed to come up with a strategy. So the whole thing is built with like a single metal profile, which is a V-shaped metal profile, which is like used as the neck for the central spine. It's used as a cross for the legs. It's used as a key for like the main, let's say, beams, and as a simple V for the other ones. So again, being serious about chilies and not wanting to compromise with the proportion of the architecture somehow forces you to, let's say, come up with very sophisticated details.
But also the informality, you know, we always are very fond of the South in general, Mexico City, Bangkok, Sicily, you know, like, it just, for us, the level of informality allow us to build something like that, allow us to play with, you know, these regulations that we usually have in, we will never be able to build this in London.
That's like recently in London, there has been a lecture by Milan, that's also known, that was showing like his latest pavilion in Santiago del Chile, that's like silver in full. And he said that people are asking him like to build it in Switzerland or in London, and he said, well, I just cannot, because like for that amount of square meters in Chile, I had 1 security exit. In London, I need 6. So the architecture fails. Like what's interesting about this is that Sabrina is right. Like the informality allows you to really experiment. On the other hand, the kind of compromises that you need to make. So these guys, I feel like they need to know that we send them a million like drawings, like angle cuts, and then there was the only plan that we saw printed in the construction site. But it wasn't an issue because again, the protagonists were the chilies. It's about you need to understand what you really need to keep. So the slenderness of the beams, like their position, their profile. It's not about the weldings in that case. It's about, as Sabrina said at the beginning, keeping an architecture built of line. So the line of the beams, the line of the shadows, and the line of the chili threads, the chili rules.
Yeah. One thing that we wanted also to mention was the etymology of mesa. Mesa in Spanish means, you know, table, but also means the misa, like the church celebration, the mass. So for us, having these tongues coming out was like allowing people to eat or to share recipes between the outside and the inside.
It was interesting, like the idea, okay, I'm not gonna enter through the doors, but I'm able to sit at the same table with you. And like something that we didn't think about, like because Sabrina called them tongues now, and it's actually true. Like people in there, well, we really thought about like we were trying to be intellectual, so mesa, misa, but people thought as well. So you did them as like red tongues because when you eat chilies, you always have a red tongue right after. And I mean, it was nice even to understand how people can recognize certain things and can project themselves, and like they can somehow look at them as inviting devices.
And I think just one thing that also was a major changing point for the project was that it was this chili dryer was supposed to be constructed in the main Alameda Central in Mexico City, a huge, wonderful square open to the public where you have 5 million of visitors every day. In the main square. And then what happened is that due to the pandemic, they asked us to build it in a completely different context. There was the private
the former
presidential palace. So he had opening hours, he had you know, security gates, and this changed completely the approach to this, you know, how the space was used.
Why we're saying this? Because like from a purely architectural proportional point of view, this place perhaps made him better because like it was more contained, you could really perceive its volumetry. But again, the fact that it wasn't a truly public space, like it didn't result into the engagement that we expected because like it was really meant like as a place where people could take home chilies, where people like could really play with the architecture spontaneously, and for us to understand to what extent, let's say, this spontaneity and this performativity could be played.
And this is important. For us, one of the main things in our mind when we were designing the gastronomic palapa, we wanted people to disassemble and to bring back home the chilies. And this is a festival which is called the Bun Festival in Cheung. It's a small island in Hong Kong that we visit when we were living in Asia. And these are towers built out of custard buns. These are structural elements height until 16 meters, which you can go, there is a race, you know, there is good luck to the one that you bring like the most buns at the end of the race. But what is for us was major was the performativity of this architectural device. It's a device for you know, for happenings, for events.
Because they told us, well, we gave you a better site, a site where the pavilion will look better, and it was true, it looked better. But again, it happened, of course, like we had to stage, like that, and people came, but it was like we can only invite selected people to disassemble it, to bring chilies home, but it was, again, less spontaneous. But like, because really, like the whole point, and of course, like, we could trigger this discussion, but like it needed to be performed, a stage discussion, and the whole point was really make people understanding that architecture can be an amazing infrastructure, an amazing supporting structure for things and unconventional materials to happen.
It wasn't too loud. Oh, thank you. Okay.
Perfect. As always, I act like the icebreaker at the end of the presentation. First of all, really thank you. It was really interesting, and I really appreciated your curiosity and enthusiasm. And I don't want to talk a lot, because really this time, please ask them whatever you want. You see, they are here for us, and they explained us so many different projects with so many different topics. You don't know that, but we were talking about some topics you presented today, so it was really appropriate. And the only thing I would like to say is that I really admire this kind of Dadaist approach you have, I think. And because what is fascinating is that you are constructing your own imaginary for architecture, but this imaginary so often does not come from architectural fields. And it comes from completely different fields, such as, of course, art, but also society and countries you visit, and normal objects you find in the markets and you collect, and then this imaginary settle and sediment in your mind, and it completely transforms in new. And at the end, it returns to be architecture, with all the tools, the specific tools of architecture, so drawings and all the technical requirements needed. So this is what the only thing I wanted to put out, to focus on, and I leave the word to my students and to Claudia, of course, if she wants to discuss.
Yeah, true. No, but it's true, because also sometimes we start with also materials that don't belong to, you know, we work a lot with wax because it's malleable, on top of metal ribs, because maybe these are the one that needs to hold. And the fact of working at home for us sometimes is a huge plus, because, you know, we cook materials and we cast stuff at home. So it's true. And then at the end, the drawings come back with a different values. Yeah.
But what's interesting also, like we had this conversation with a student last week. We were giving a similar lecture in Vienna, and like we were happy that like he was somehow giving us that comment. Sometimes now when you work a lot, like you're totally right. Like we work a lot in such a way, we get things, and then like we use them like spontaneously to build a very personal imagery, and then like they come like from very different places in the world, and there's always like the risk of like appropriating them culturally, you know, like it's always like you always work on a fine line, and you don't know where you need to stop yourself. Like if you are entitled to use something, really, if you're serious things, you can work with everything and you can talk about everything. But like architecture, as you said, the tools, sometimes making certain things more abstract or abstract enough helps to, let's say, make them, if you want, even more universal. Because like them, somehow you work with certain cultural connotations, but you dilute some others, so you allow people to recognize things, but also to project themselves in that, without like straining too much, let's say, the accessibility. So in that sense, abstraction and like architecture are really media tools for us to be able to work with things, because like otherwise we wouldn't know how to.
Yes. And also time is time and negotiation. Your keywords are so appropriate because you need time to understand. For example, you need time to sedimentate this imaginary. And maybe an aspect of youth sometimes is to be in a hurry, to want to express everything immediately, and maybe you see something in a country and then you go back to London, and then at a certain point that object you discovered in Mexico City transforming. Yes. And that's also why I think your approach is very adaptable and flexible. You often tell us this was thought for a place, but then we had built in another place. So that's why it works, I think.
But you're right. It's also like, well, we're still relatively young. So like that
yes.
urgency, no? That
yes.
like is like, and that's why we are saying sometimes we cannot wait for the right commission or for the right competition, because maybe we have an object, we have something, and like we really need to make a model or to make a drawing with it, so at least like we feel fine, okay, so it's gonna be there, ready maybe in 3 years, in 4 years, but like, because we look at something and we know that we wanna do, we have that urgency, but we know that we need also to wait for the right, let's say, moment, pull it out.
Okay. It's your turn. Or Claudia, maybe.
Yeah, just very few words. I hope that the ones that are listening to us from home can. Well, no, I was really impressed by the variety of and heterogeneous list of projects you showed. But at the very end, there was like a continuous line, a continuous figure that somehow can collect everything. That was the approach, the method on one side, but also the fact that at the very end, the traditions from all over the world came across and just influenced somehow in our reciprocal, I don't know, contamination. And I think it was very interesting. Also, the time, that was also one of your keywords, that is long for study and to design, short for the event, but not very short later, because these installations there are deconstructed by people or lived by people or can teach and bring something to people can last really long, even disappearing. So I think it's a very interesting aspect of time and definition of time in this meeting. But I would
It does
like
not.
to, yeah.
I can agree in the way about architecture, because I think you constructing a space, you look for that space in context for relation with our history. So my question is, how do you share those abstract ideas into a real one process or to use in order to get to a material in that abstract imaginary you create? And if the architecture in that position is about is a limit for you or is a tool in order to create it? You think about it.
Very important, very complex question. I think that both of us have different way of reading architecture, you know, or any way to, sorry, not to read architecture, to read the starting point. For example, if Lorenzo brings the blueprint, the plan of something, even if it doesn't belong to a building, but it belongs to, you know, an object that you place on top and then it traces back, it starts from like a plan point of view, while instead I work maybe through perspectives and understanding of like section cuts, eat something, what is left. Maybe the first project that we did together is a good chance to explain that. But also the Mine, the Sant'Agata, like it was a lot about learning from, you know, pastry recipes, first of all, and dictating, so literally writing the ingredients and understanding what goes first, what comes later. And what we were looking at that point was, for example, the translation into historical times. So how gel was jelly molds in Victorian times were built, and they were made out of like cast iron, but with different things, allowing for the jellies to set at different heights. So at that point, for us, that became the unit of measure of translating that into the drawing, literally.
Yeah, in my opinion, what's interesting is that, yeah, you're right. Like maybe Sabrina is more into, let's say, material investigation and more into geometrical investigation. But what we really share, both of us, and we think it's a fundamental, let's say, thing of architecture, so not the limit, is that like we're both very operative. We approach things very, very simply. Like we like something, let's do something with it. Could be trying to build the plan of like an object. It could be trying to make a million like material investigation of it. Because like for us, doing something with that thing is the only way to understand how we can work with it. Like we believe that in that sense, architecture, even when it's like let's say theoretical, speculative, it's always very propositive. We propose things. So like, and this is something that we always like try to say to our students as well. Like, do things.
Yeah.
Like you want to like, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of like, you want to work with something. Don't think, well, is it right for me to work with that? Try. I have, even like when they asked us as tutor, can I work with this? Well, if you didn't try to do something with it, I have no idea. Try and let's see together.
Yeah.
Like let's see. And again, if you are serious, if you're precise, if you are committed, you can work, in our opinion, with anything. Like you said the word, like for example, tradition. No? That like for us Italians, sometimes if you think about it, traditions, untouchable. Well, there's an amazing book called The Invention of Tradition. Like traditions have been invented at some point by people that were trying to do things with the stuff and with the ideas surrounding them.
So the gap between research, now I do research, and then I start designing, doesn't exist for us. So everything is very merged. So we ask students or even ourselves, sometimes, you know, we live together, we work together. So he comes back home and he's like, I think aluminum could be a good one. And I'm like, okay, just try then. So then he goes back, he takes a sample, he goes on the street, and then we try to do anything that we can bring back and keep working with it. It can be a video, but we work also with different mediums. I work a lot with the video software animation, with the moving image in general. He's extraordinary with drawing, so he works through, you know, lines and geometries and extrusion. At one point, he's like recomposing. So this dictionary comes alive, but every time without any, you know, don't take yourself too seriously. So try things. Also, don't take anything for granted.
Be serious in trying.
Be serious in trying, yes.
But like, you know, sometimes, as we say also like, to our students, like, but also to us, because again, for us, maybe it's the only way we can do things. You know, we often hear the word research-led design. What about design-led research? Like, so, I mean, because if you want to put together research pieces, which ultimately, partly because we like it, partly because like we are in that world, and for our generation, it's always like harder and harder to get like bigger commissions in architecture. So we end up always trying to work between research projects, speculative projects, design projects, but like we progress by doing things, by trying, failing a lot of times, but like, and that's why we're saying that in a cumulative way. We have like every time we do a project, we have like a million things which might be which might look inconsistent at the beginning. Like try to build your own logic by being operative. That's the tip we could give.
I was seeing that in architecture there is a sort of grid approach and playground objects don't fit this grid. Is there a possibility that Shudomis and Weissman needs their inspirations in this installations?
Maybe Shumi more than Eisenman.
Yes. Yes.
The same concept
Yeah.
of the Aussie Legolosi.
Yes. Yeah. It's
Maybe Shumi more than Eisenman, like both, let's say, tectonically, but also like theoretically. Like, but for example, like the whole thread of the architecture of the event, or like there are two initial projects by him that, in our opinion, are very important, and they come often, let's say, in our conversations. Like one which is called Fireworks, like when he designed like fireworks for the Architectural Association in London. And if you see the drawings, they are amazing
construct it,
architectural
yeah.
drawings to build fireworks, so
Yeah.
perhaps to build nothing. No, but they're amazing ones. And then, like, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And then at some point with Rosalie Goldberg, like at the Royal College of Arts, where we're teaching now, back in the 70s, the 80s, they would found Performa, which is now an association in New York, that was somehow the premise for like this whole idea of performative architecture. There's a book which is called Bodybuilding that gathers together like 30, 40 years of performances, starting from the Italians like Ugo La Pietra, like Super Studio, down to understanding of the architectural event by SUMA.
But I think also the cartographies of Perri always come back for us. They're not maps, so they don't have a geographical reference. They are cartographies of time. They're cartography of like gestures, of memories. They are overlaid. So what we work on is always like, we have a sandwich, you know, and then there are so many layers. And these layers are independent, but we try always to like overlay or adjust the different things together. Those are really also a good, like one for us, very important reference that we use. How everything links back, and if you take, you know, your piece out, what is left? How can we readjust? You know, we talk about this project in this way today, but maybe tomorrow we can readjust them completely different depending on what we were looking at. They're, you know, they're not just one thing. There are so many embedded links within a project.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, even like that idea of time, it's nice when you like sometimes not the idea of like you complete an architectural project. There's a moment where it doesn't exist, then it's built, then it exists, done, finished. Like the idea of treating every project as an open thread, as something that like maybe tomorrow, maybe in a month, maybe in 2 years will give us something back, and we can keep on manipulating it. It's something very, very crucial. That's it. Okay.
Yes.
As you
We have
No,
we dedicate it to you guys. The project that we're working now for the Venice Biennale, we are exploring sound. Just,
that's my field.
and different, yes, and playing with different type of materials, but sound is something that now at the moment we're like really triggered by that, and we just
I would, maybe a million things. I would say like everything that really. Because you're right, you know, and I think it's nice that the fact that it comes across. Like even if you go on our website, it says LEMONOT, Architecture and Performative Arts. Because at some point you need a bit of you need a label to talk to people. Otherwise, people don't talk to you. But if you really ask me or ask us, like, what's the difference between architecture, performative arts, visual arts? We can give you some definitions that we learned. That like we read in books, and with some of them we agree, with some of them we agree less. But for us, it's a bit more of an amalgam, and we are trying like, well, another thing, like we believe that like even as architects, but especially let's say as artists that work across multiple fields, and one of them is architecture, we never, let's say, fix anything. We know that we never solve issues. No, we work with them and we address them. So let's say our aim is always trying to make, let's say, very tailored, bespoke intervention that are using the right media that let's say commission competition requires. And of course, we're not gonna lie, like it's clear that like we negotiate then what's needed with a very personal imagery that has been built and stratified across the year. But
I think it's also how to share knowledge and how you build your own. You know, I learned a lot by the agronomists that collaborated with us. The guys cutting, I never follow a guy cutting tombs and types of cuts, and how much water is needed to cut a 45-degree marble, what doesn't crumbles. We work with anthropologists, we work with like agronomists. They are filled with bankers. I think it's important to just like really allow the drawings or the project to bring their voices as much as yours. And I think architects have an ego. Sometimes it's very hard to knock down. And for us, the exchange is what is building really a good, like an interesting project that can be talked also with non-architects. So I think that's, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's the latest question because it's almost which is the reference. But I wanted to ask how did you come or how did this kind of process come to you? Because I never thought that looking at the face with the architect, and maybe I didn't necessarily know how to take that inspiration. And I wanted to ask you, is there a person, a teacher, did you find this by combining all these disciplinaries together? How did you come up with this process?
I mean, I feel that, I mean, there has been some, let's say, teachers very influential in that sense for us, but I would say it's something quite, say, embedded in our personality. We're very curious. We are like, we like to touch things, to look at things, we're very Italian, so in that sense, no? And then at some point we were, I think, like, I don't know, maybe we can give also different answers, but like we were, it's not that someone told us to do that, but like we were very, let's say, perhaps even bored of like the references that like you always work with. And so similarly, the way it started is that we were trying, and then like by looking at the things and like by not being afraid of like assessing them as right or wrong before starting, like we began doing that, and it was quite effective. I feel that something, for example, that we say to our students is that
you also studied.
Yeah, I
I
studied first in Italy, and then I moved to London. And I remember at first I had like a lot of difficulties in that sense. Like, but it was, I needed only to convince myself, like the idea of like, because I was saying, well, can I work with that? Well, what does that mean? Just try. Like, there's something that we tend to say on our students, and perhaps Sabrina can expand on that. She's way better than me at doing that. Like, is that you, us, all of us, the main skill in all the creative disciplines is like learning how to observe. There are like two architects, which are, they never were our tutors, we deeply admire them, that they mainly do, well, they only do films. They're called Beck and LeMonoT. They do mainly architectural documentaries, and they had for a few years at the AA a studio which was called the Laboratory of Sensible Observers. So what does it mean to observe sensibly?
The last lecture, I showed you some frame of their documentaries.
They did also an exhibition at the Maxi last year. Yeah.
And that's a skill, like, that you can, what I believe, and then I'll really leave the word to Sabrina, because this idea of observing sensibly, you need to have a talent for it, which she has like way more than me, but like you can cultivate it.
I think that, for example, I grew up through a Montessori like methodology. You know, it's like for me, making things or touching with my hand. I still learn numbers through. You know, we have this tape, like small tableau of like rough edges to learn the numbers, and you feel the number. So you know the number. And I still, like, you know, I have this imprint within me, it's true. And I did all of them. Then I moved to London when I was 18, and I did all my academic, my architectural degree in London at the AA, at the Architectural Association. It was 7 years.
Which is a very Montessori
Which is a very Montessorian approach. I didn't want to do architect. I didn't want to do university. My parents said, no way, you're gonna do it. You know, you're gonna go to London. But I think that they found, or they had, you know, in mind something for me that I wasn't aware, because for me it was come naturally. But my sister that didn't do a Montessori school, no, she knew that there were some kind of things that I was bringing with me every time, and I had difficulty in very focusing. Through doing things, I find my concentration, you know. So I think it's also learning from yourself. When is it that you accept your own form and you want to go for it, and you bring forward your own methods.
Let's say the good combination that works for us. So I'm not gonna say that it's a good combination per se, but like for us, the way it works, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that like Sabrina, she's very, very intuitive and very, very sensible when it comes to observing the reality, and like when it comes to grasping things and trusting them. Like, I'm very, very stubborn. I can be working and committed to work with like a tiny thing for months. So, and in that sense, like it works very, very well. This combination of like intuition, capability of capturing, getting things, and like stubbornness in like committing and being.
And I think also that the studio space for me at the university, I always stay at school. So the school became the place of production. It was my environment, you know. I couldn't not create back at home alone against a wall on the computer, because I needed conversation. I needed to see a model by someone else. It's not that you're automatically stealing, but you're stealing in the way that you're absorbing. And then, you know, like this kind of environment that allow you to stay in, to digest, to ferment your ideas, but always to have someone else watching you or just saying, hey, look, just stop doing that detail, because think about the larger picture now, you know? So this guy, my tutor called the creative disobedience. Yeah.
Oh, but the surrounding. So even in that sense, working from home has been like quite important for us until now. Now we're in a moment where like perhaps it's not enough. Like we live in London, so we have a tiny flat, as you can imagine, and like it starts being full of stuff, even a bit too much. But like, I mean, for example, the issue that like we often have with the conventional architectural projects is that like they're very mediated. And I mean, and there's no way to go around it. Like, I mean, it's not that you can be on site every day. It's not that you can talk to everyone. It's not like in the trials, like we showed you, mainly small scale projects, because like it feels for us like a scale that we can control, again, spatially and relationally the way we want. Now we are trying actually to scale up this methodology. We are having like a couple of projects that are scaling it up, like both in space, so they are more conventional architectural projects, or in time, which are maybe longer, let's say, longer artist residencies, because like what we showed you, like, you're right, like some of them are slow, meaning like they're constructed by multiple moments, but very fragmented in time. Like what happens, like if we dedicate continuously, I don't know, 3 years to the same thing, or like this idea of scaling it up and understanding how this methodology, which is very, I don't know if you say that in English, like kinesthetic, like which is related to synesthetic, which is related again to feel, to touch, to smell, to observe what immediately surrounds you.
So they started
we did. Architecture Association is an architectural school. Yeah. No, it's architecture. But architecture taught with a different methodology, you know? I think that, you know, you have different units, so different classes that you can take with different briefs. And the briefs are so diverse, and there is such a horizontality and non-competition, because everything exists within its own, you know, like, because Lorenzo is
non-competition,
Lorenzo
sure,
is
but anyway,
with itself. Like, but like there are completely different pots of Pandora boxes that you can open and dig in. And what is interesting was the cross-reference or the cross-crits, where you go to another unit that is doing cinema and is working through images. And the other one is building
in relationship to architecture and to the build space. Like we are advocating for all of these as different lands. No,
it's broader, but I graduated as an architect. We both graduated as architects. But then what you give as an architect title, then it's
we believe that they're all architectural projects. I mean, you can even expand this conversation later with Claudia. I'm also curious to hear what she thinks. She was like our guest last week. She saw a bit of our students.
And we met in London the last year we were graduating. And that same year we started to teach. So we were 26. And we started our visiting school in Bolivia. And we went there,
So, and why are these?
We teach there, that's true. That's a very good question.
That's an interesting question.
I mean, it's 14 years that we're there.
But we do,
yeah.
what we do have, I mean,
We do have a relationship which allow us to, teach there, but then constantly working or having workshop in Milan when we go here. Nowadays, actually, in Italy, we come back quite often. For me, it's my home, but there is a kind of, I will never be able to live just in London without coming back perhaps every 2 months in Rome or.
We can also say that, like, I mean, let me see how to articulate this, but like we have projects in London in the sense that we teach in London. And what I'm trying to say, not that like students' projects are our projects at all, like, because, and again, I'm curious to hear what Claudia thinks, but like we really tend to step back. So like to not interfere, just to propose an approach, a methodology. And like we have like a very small class. So we have like 13, 14 students. So we can really tailor the projects on top of their interests, on top of their skills, on top of the wishes. So we tend to step back. But for us, teaching is a sort of ongoing project, because like this idea of like learning and observing and grasping and smelling what surrounds you, we could never work without teaching. And we could never teach without working at all. Like we believe that the two things are really symbiotic, but in that sense, teaching is for us like a fundamental environment where to propose, test ideas, to discuss them operatively.
And the students are the expert. So it's not us. We are, the one that can direct you and guide you as much as possible, sharing the references, ideas, methodologies, approaches, because we have some experience that we bring. But the students are the expert. They lead the conversation. They lead the project. They are in charge.
And it's for us like an opportunity to learn.
We learn a lot.
Learn a lot from them. Because like, again, really, as you saw, like what we teach together is,
we collaborate with students.
But what we teach together, like that idea of conviviality and convivialism. Of course, there are like two amazing texts describing that. But like then the whole point is trying to define for each of the students operatively what convivialism means for him, for her, and how it can be really used as an architectural, spatial, relational, political tool. So that's the only somehow constraint we give. It's like, okay, let's operate under this umbrella. Well, let's define your take on this umbrella. And like the other thing that we somehow constrain is like we ask them always to build new forms of one-to-one experiences. So to understand what it means, especially in school, to construct one-to-one. So like, because you can do a crazy thing, but if you test it only within the university, so among us, we all like congratulate each other, how nice, how experimental, how beautiful. Like if you put it outside and if you understand what it means to put it out as a real thing, even when you are a student, without dealing like with practical constraints. So a one-to-one is not like you design a building and then you get a component, but like you need to build a prop, an experience. So you need to work with sounds, images, or physical models, pieces of architecture that then they need to be distorted to put them in there. So these are the only things, but like in terms of topics, contents, or like then the precedents, the references that they bring, like it's a very mutual. So it's, in that sense, it's a project. And it's a project that we have in London and that we find very hard. We don't really want to detach ourselves.
London has a power of like engaging with so many different communities and different audiences. And that is like something that for us is fundamental. So I think, yeah. Mixtures of commission lately, competitions, although competitions are very hard. Then you submit something, 500 entries.
We just showed you a few. In London, we have like tons of failed competitions.
Yes.
So it's not that we're not trying to work in London. We find it, in London, we find it like very hard to work, especially in public space. Because like we believe, well, and then maybe that's very personal, so take it or leave it, but like we believe that London is still an amazing environment when it comes to the academy. So the schools are very interesting places. Then like galleries or museums, everything that happens indoor is still very, very radical, very, very provocative. As soon as you get out, like in public space, everything becomes like quite flat, quite like speaking about architecture, everything is very qualitative, meaning like it's constructed very, very well, but no one takes risks. Like it's very, very homogeneous. So it's very hard. That's why I was giving you the anecdote of Smina Radic. Like it's very, even if there are like high budgets, it's very, very hard to work as architects in public spaces. So this dichotomy indoor, outdoor, we find it a bit problematic, but still.
Also, it's important for us to try to think about other ways of getting involved without waiting for a competition, an open call, a residency. Sometimes the documentary that I'm gonna share the link maybe in Stockholm that I worked on. The way of approaching the neighborhood was for me to write letters and post them to each house to be involved with them. And that started the project. It wasn't like, if you want, those pamphlets that the council gives you usually, like, oh, if you have any feedback, let us know, we're implementing this new, It wasn't a response. It was a proper action, an informal action of me writing and going post by post and knocking doors and reading the surname of the people, so then I could actually know where I could, So other ways of being involved in projects in a different way would be important for us to develop further. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about the solution that is now. Are you happy that maybe in maybe it was a little bit more spread. So I feel that now maybe when people out, people decide maybe now it's too big for them.
So totally. Yeah. But it's not only dimensions, I think. Like I think it's a combination. Like it's deeply the funny thing, and you're right, like it's more finished than before, because like it's painted like when we built it in Ostense, it was like left rough as a very industrial piece, like it looked more unfinished. But now, I mean, even if it looks more finished, it's deeply unfinished because of the fences, because of like it now needs more things, which we're trying to understand. For example, it now needs things that without explaining it to people, make them understand that it's a space. It's not a piece, it's not a prop, it's not an object. So perhaps, for example, it needs now something on the flooring that like frames an area, and then like something, for example, maybe soft or something green, something that like makes people like what you saw, like that lunch that happened like partially in Italy, partially staged in Ostense. We need to understand how, as architects, even in such a problematic, well, not problematic, even in such a space, that can happen. We feel it's a challenge. So we feel there's room to make it work, but it needs help. It needs like and it can be the help that it needs is again spatial and relational, because like it's for us also like perhaps we need to, what was interesting like within the context of the Festival of Architecture and also with some of the students that are here, is that we could talk with residents. Now in Tiburtina, like it didn't happen yet, but also like it needs an architectural help. It needs some other elements that are really clarifying what it should do.
But that's the main deal. Like we wanted the OSE to be used. So we just wanted people to get like, to not just see it from far away. So then when it got moved, then we also love the fact of having these the aluminum cuts that you could see the welders where they attach the piece, because it was against the gasometer. When you move it to such a different context, then it loses the value. So then you cannot just decide everything. But like when they told us this is inappropriate to show this craft, then what you can do is just to paint it back. It's not ideal, but for us it was just, for us it's interesting the response on Tiburtina, because it's also like, I don't know if it happens here in Italy, I'm actually not sure, but in London, when the council bring an art installation or invites a designer to do something in the space, they have people in charge of the neighborhood. So there are like 2 or 3 people that are always involved with the decision making. If there are no people involved and are just like a kind of audience and they're not participants, then is where the clash happens, and it's very hard to because you are just intruding in a space that needs so much more than just the Aussie there.
But it's also like very simple. No? We're reading now a lot of criticism related, like a lot of people are writing on Facebook, like, can you imagine, like, why did they put that useless thing? Can you imagine how hot it's going to be?
Very,
fair enough. I would think the same, because like it's fenced, and they cannot expect people to look at it and think, okay, he's going to do the chimney effect, use the airflow. Like the simple way of getting that feeling is like, remove the fence, put a chair below it, someone goes there, sits down, feels well, done.
it's done.
It's
That's right.
Yeah.
I think that add more objects like that, not
I think that is
one would be.
I think that's the idea, that's the trajectory of how they would love the space to be used. But if that remains just between the municipality, the governing institution, that they talk in a reunion like this, and then they don't allow the public to know, then there is a glitch. But it's obvious this.
But it's the same thing with objects. No? You can work with anything, but it's not that you can take this, well, done, you have it. Like, we are not advocating for postmodernist approach to architecture. Well, we put it, we scale it up. You need to, let's say, work with stuff. Same thing with one-to-one pieces. If you want to move one thing to another place, that's meant, let's say, to be adapted to multiple places. It's like its specificity is embedded into its properties, but like it needs care, it needs love, it needs adjustments, it needs like, I don't know, maybe more friends, or it needs, let's say, appendixes. Like it needs, we have several,
Yes. Yes,
And they invite people to stop because there are so many that multiple topics in them, and also, of course, sound would be so helpful. Not to imagine what could happen with sound descending from the cones, and inviting people to enter. It would be
Let's see.
But even starting with simple chairs, like remove the fence, simple chairs, like.
But you know, one in the gasometer, when we were in Ostiense, there were always these this guy parking his car so close to it, and then I was saying, but look, you really need it because I cannot park. And he said, I'm so happy that this thing is here. I can park my car. It's so fresh at the end of the day. And I was like, fair enough. You're right. You know, but the interaction is what makes valuable, to be honest. Otherwise, what do you do things for? Yeah. We're gonna be anyway here. So if you wanna chat outside,
And I know today it was really maybe if you want to